Hello, friends. Welcome to A Little View, the podcast where the perspective may be small, but the conversations are anything but small. I'm Gwen, your podcast host, a health coach, a soon to be dietitian, and an advocate for all things. This is the podcast where we talk about things that are not only not talked about, with a voice for the unrepresentative, and we have empowering conversations about healing our mind, body, and soul through a unique perspective, while bringing on guests to share their inspiring stories as well. And today we have a very exciting guest, even though I say that with every guest. Today is an exciting guest because I believe everyone should have this type of person in their lives. Not only should they have her in your life because she's pretty awesome, but also they should have this type of person, which is today I will be joined with Bri Beck. She is a therapist located in Chicago, helping clients find their identity with disabilities, but she's also an art therapist. Regardless of any situation in your life, you always need to have her because a lot of people have said to me, because I go to a therapist, and a lot of people have said, oh, like, what are you going through? You don't even look that depressed. I'm like, well, actually, it's not just about depression. You should be talking to a therapist about anything. Without me rambling anymore, I would like Bri to introduce herself a little more and just give me a little elevator pitch.
Hi, Gwen. Thank you so much for that introduction. You hit a lot of just like of the basics of who I am. But yeah, my name is Bri Beck. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor and art therapist. I live in Chicago. I used to be a graphic designer, so I've always been into the arts. I work with folks of all kinds, but most specifically, I love to work with those in the disability community. And when I say disability community, I mean pretty broadly speaking, from anyone that has any sort of physical disability, skeletal dysplasia, for instance, autism, ADHD, rare conditions, type 1 diabetes, all sorts of things. And I typically work a lot with young adults finding their way in the world, starting careers, starting families, struggling to do those things, struggling to find out their identity and who they are, and also living life with a disability, which doesn't always come with a manual or a lot of examples, right, of how to do that. So yeah, I find it very rewarding. One thing I didn't add to that is that I am a little person. I live with pseudo achondroplasia. So that is my perspective when it comes to being an LP.
Well, thank you so much for introducing yourself and giving us a little more insight of who you are. And I know you kind of said this a little, but what kind of made you become a therapist, especially from you going from all the way from a graphic designer, which is a big jump.
I've always been a big dreamer and somebody that's like, I want to like make a difference in the world and I want to do things like with people. And I think growing up being different and always feeling like I had, I don't know, I was learning a lot about people and how people worked and learning a lot about the not so great things about society and the world, as I'm sure you can relate to, dealing with stigma. Like I always felt like I wanted to do something with that, but I never knew how. And I always, though, even from a young age, like expressed my experiences artistically. And so I've always just loved art. And it's been a part of the language that I use to just like process things for myself and also tell stories. And so I went to undergrad for art, but I was like, how do I get a job? So I decided I was going to do graphic design. And I still love design. I still do a little freelance work and I still think it's a wonderful form of art. But when you actually apply graphic design to the real world, at least what I experienced when I first graduated was like, oh, this is a lot more like corporate than I realized, or this is a lot more of like going into marketing or going into advertising. And not that those things aren't great and there's good things about them. It's just like, I think being a naive, 18-year-old that was like, I'm going to be a graphic designer, didn't quite understand what that looked like in the real world. And so I had a bit of a quarter life crisis there. And I decided when I graduated undergrad that I wanted to kind of figure out what I wanted to do with my life and I needed to kind of buy myself time. And I actually, instead of just kind of going straight into a career, I joined the Teach for America program and I taught middle school math. And it was a very transformational experience doing a lot of like up close work in communities that were really underserved and learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about my privilege and just yeah, a lot of things wrong with the education system. And but I knew through that experience that I did not love being a teacher, but what I did love doing was working with adolescents and these emerging adults and really building relationships with them. And I felt that I had a real talent in just like that side of things, like the more one-on-one and even community building too. I just didn't like being in front of a classroom and teaching. And at the same time, I had kind of learned about art therapy as a discipline and as a career path. Thought, wow, I think I want to really pursue that and go get my graduate education in art therapy. And it actually wouldn't be too much of a leap because I already have an art degree and all I needed to do was get like a few psychology prerequisites under my belt. So I went to community college and got those, and at the same time worked as a graphic designer for a small business, and eventually landed back in grad school for my master's and have been practicing now for about 6 or 7 years full time in the field. So I'm still, relatively new, but getting my bearings. And I've worked in community mental health and I've worked in hospital settings, but now I work more in a private practice and I work for myself and see clients individually.
And you saying you had to go back for some courses to get
Mhm.
your art therapy. Do you just do art therapy or do you just do standalone therapy as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I am a mixed bag. So I think every therapist in general, but every art therapist I think works really differently. There are some that are like, I am only art and this is my thing and I'm gonna like really own it and we're only gonna do art. For me, I think I'm a talker, so I don't mind doing talk
Okay.
therapy as well. And I feel like I do a lot of a mixture of things.
Mhm.
And there are even a lot of clients I see where it's just talking. But knowing that I'm an art therapist, sometimes they will be open to the fact that I might be like, hey, this actually feels like a really good opportunity for us to explore what you're going through more creatively. Would you mind if we took an artistic approach to this
Mhm.
and we involved like new materials or we, or I might give them, I'm not a big homework therapist, but I might say, here's a little like homework that I want you to explore this creatively through a drawing or through some sort of like any sort of creative exercise, right? Writing a poem, writing a song, things like that, because the arts just expand our worldview and they're a whole new vocabulary for us to use when words fail. And folks are constantly surprised at what can happen when they actually turn to art for increased insight and even like working through some of their trauma and emotions. And it can just be an extremely powerful tool. And it's extremely human to be artistic, no matter if you think you are or not. Everybody has creativity in them and it just comes out in different forms. One thing I didn't mention was that I've had my own mental health journey through therapy, and that was a big reason why I wanted to become a therapist too. When I was in the Teach for America program, I definitely had to come face to face with a lot of the things, that it meant to be a little person and being in the adult world for the first time and being a person of short stature in teaching a classroom of middle schoolers and just how that felt. And coming up against stigma in job interviews, not being hired for things, living in the South. And not that I didn't grow up in like a more, a rural area, right? Where like there wasn't a lot of exposure to difference. Like I just felt my experiences really be amplified. I felt like, and I also felt like I had stuffed down all the emotion of growing up and all the surgeries and all the feeling different and being stared at, having my picture taken, things like that, that a lot of little people go through. And I just never let myself feel those feelings because it was just all about surviving and
Yeah.
getting through and achieving, right? And trying to almost even like outrun my disability and try to overcome it. And when I was at that time in my life, I went to therapy for the first time because I just really was struggling with anxiety, depression, panic attacks, and such. And I had to face it because I just couldn't sustain pushing it down anymore. And luckily, I ended up with an incredible therapist who helped me tremendously. And it really changed my life. And I think that also made me feel like, wow, I want to do this. And I also want to like do this for the disability community because as much as she was incredible, there was a limited experience of what she could offer me in terms of her understanding of what I was going through. And I felt like, wow, it would be pretty cool to have a therapist who actually understood this. So I hope to provide that for others. Not that I can ever understand every single thing that people go through, but just having a general connection to disability and working with others with disability, I think is really powerful, and I'm grateful to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think even like you touched on the fact of being a little person and having stares at pictures, living basically in a world that's not meant for you. Like I think we just kind of go through it because we're told like, okay, this is your life. Like this is your life. But I don't think so. It's kind of like, I guess, shoved off to the side instead of actually talking more about that issue. Like, no, yes, this is your life, but this needs to be talked about. This needs to be addressed. Like your body image, being a woman, like all these things. But it's kind of like, no, like you're okay. Like kind of like a you'll be okay, just keep going, it's going to be fine, instead of talking about it. So I think that, especially for little people, is very important just to have a therapist alone, because all those factors, we don't realize how much plays an important part in like just how we see ourselves.
Oh, for sure. The social emotional piece of being a little person is very, I think it's getting more like talked about now
Mhm.
that even just with increased mental health awareness across society, like I think that's being roped in, but it's like I know for me, just having so much emphasis on my physical well-being growing up, like constant surgeries, physical therapy, like the emphasis is only on the body and even on like the accommodations and how are you going to drive and all those things that are very important, but I always felt like I had to be so strong.
Yeah.
And I grew up, I have pseudoachondroplasia. My parents are both average height. My brother's average height, and everyone around me was average height, right? And I really, for so long, like denied the fact that I was a little person. Like for me, that was really hard to accept because it was just like all the media representation that I saw.
Mhm.
I didn't like want to associate with that identity. And that was so much of like the external stigma that I saw like represented that I didn't almost like allow myself to identify with that. It was like, no, I'm just like everybody else. But it was like denial. And I think when we think about grief in the five stages, like denial is the first stage of grief,
Yeah.
right? And but it makes sense because when you're young, you just want to belong, you just want to fit in. You
Yeah.
shouldn't have to deal with all this like who am I
Yeah.
existential stuff at that age. It's just you just want to be a kid. But I think also having parents that were like average height and didn't quite know what that was like, they often felt guilty and they often felt like my dad would ask me a lot, always well-meaning, like, Bri, are you sad? Are you angry? And I always felt like I had to say no because I didn't want him to feel bad. And so I think a lot of kids that grow up with disabilities are feel that need to kind of suppress their emotions. And so those always come out later in life, usually when you're a young adult and your brain kind of finishes developing, like that's when the anxiety and the depression start to come. And that was certainly my experience. So there's a lot in terms of like, yeah, the developmental impact of growing up with a disability or growing up with a difference
Yeah.
of any sort.
Like you said too, even having parents that are not disabled or don't have achondroplasia, it's them not being able to understand. So then you feeling kind of like you don't want to make them feel a certain way if you say a
Right.
certain thing. So when I was younger, it was often like, okay, you're just like everyone else. But then also I would also be made to feel different. So it was kind of like a little bit of both. But then if I express the fact that I hate being little, this sucks, all this, even though I can't change that, it was like, well, you can't do anything about it. It's like, okay, yeah, but we're just like, we're not really talking about the issue here.
Right.
So, yeah, I agree with you. And going back to you being a therapist, when you say art therapy, what do you actually mean when you say that?
I'm still working on my elevator pitch for that, Gwen, but I will do my best. For me, I see art therapy as like another set of tools in my tool bag. So, kind of like I said earlier, art is just another vocabulary for us to use. Like,
But
if you
when you like, if you work with clients, I think it says on your website that you work with them online as well. So when
Mhm.
you work with clients online and you do art therapy, do you just say like draw a picture, or what do you say?
Yeah, it's very dependent. I'm gonna try to give a good example. So you can use any sort of materials in art therapy. It's
Yeah.
not just drawing, it's embroidery, it's clay, you can do collage, you can do sculpture, really anything, right? And I think there's even digital media that you can use. You
Mhm.
can encourage people to use photography for their artistic processing. But one thing that just might be a very simple directive is like if you have watercolors with you, I might say like, can you just really take your emotions and maybe it's sadness, right? And try to depict your emotional landscape with watercolors. What does the weather look like? What color is the sky? Are there, are there mountains in your landscape? What are these things represent? And try to like use symbols to define where they're at. I might encourage people to do a self-portrait of themselves and, where are you at today? Maybe, I've had people make like a mask for themselves where like the front of the mask is what they're showing to the world and the back of the mask is what they're feeling inside. There's all these different ways to use art materials to really like gain insight, but also express what words fail to do and to be witnessed by me. Or if people want to share their artwork with a friend or a trusted loved one, or even show it in an art show, which people have done. It's like being witnessed in that way. Because I think art can be so powerful. It's the old adage, like a picture's worth 1,000 words. Like it's really true that sometimes you can just look at a piece of art and get the feeling that the artist wants you to get or the artist felt when they made it. And it's like that resonance and that connection can be so powerful. Because I know I've struggled sometimes to put what I want to say into words. I feel like words are failing me and I'm like, I'm not conveying really what it is. And I think that's because words are limited. And also with trauma, so much of the trauma that we've experienced in our lives lives in our right brain. It's like it lives in kind of the image center. It's why we remember, if we've experienced trauma and there's a traumatic memory, it can be hard to talk about because it's like so vivid and so detailed in our minds. But if we can't get it out, it's really hard to like heal from that. Being able to express that trauma artistically can be very powerful. And, same with music and dance. Those things live in the right part of our brain or the right hemisphere. Also, when we're making art, we're in our bodies and we're grounded, and it can help soothe any sort of distress that can come out when you're actually dealing with traumatic material. So it is really powerful in that way. So when I'm in a session with folks, whether it's in person or virtually, I have a small art studio. So I do see some people in person. We might just get out certain materials that feel right in the moment. And sometimes we'll work together quietly. Usually I work on my own art that is relevant to the themes being discussed so that I'm not just staring at someone making
Yeah.
art. And usually after, 30 minutes or so, we'll stop and we'll look at each other's art and we'll process it together and we'll have a conversation with the art. But usually I'm focusing on their art. But
Yeah.
if there needs to be like a conversation, I'll be like, oh, I was thinking about this. What do you think of that? Then on the other hand, sometimes in art therapy, it's just people who want to use their hands while they're talking, and using their hands, like using, crocheting or knitting, right, might help them feel a little bit more grounded. And especially again, when they're talking about distressing material. So some people just prefer to be a little bit more mindless about it. And it helps them like, especially those with like ADHD or autism who like to kind of fidget or, need that kind of like stimulation. Art can be really powerful for that too.
And I think too, like it's kind of like with what you said about like draw me the weather and how you're feeling. I know for me personally, because I love doing art, but for me, it's always like it needs to look a specific way. It needs to be perfect. And if not, it's perfect, then I don't like it. But kind of going back to what you were saying of just like drawing how you're feeling, like just expressing how you're feeling. It doesn't have to be this elaborate thing. And I think for me, I often think like it needs to be like, it needs to be stellar instead of just, it doesn't have to be for show. It can just be for you. But then also saying too, is when I was going through a really hard time through an eating disorder in high school, like that was the only thing that like people could fully grasp is, I mean, it wasn't pretty, I'll tell you that, because it was very depressing, a lot of it, but you could just feel the emotion in it. And I feel like I'm sure it's the same with your clients, some of them who are going through really rough patches, like you can feel what they're going through.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. That's like a really powerful testimony to what art has done for
Yeah.
you. And you're right. Like sometimes it's just like you show people a drawing that you did when you're really going through it and they're like, my God, like I feel that. And that I wonder for you if that felt really nice and validating and affirming maybe is,
Yeah.
and so yeah, again, being witnessed in your pain, because a lot of times there's nothing you can do except be in it and move through it. But you're so right. Like also with the perfectionism piece with art, it's such a big thing that so many of us deal with. Something I deal with having gone to school for art, which was so much more about like skill and product and like having something that was impressive, right?
Yeah.
Or that said
Mhm.
something really clearly, and you have critiques and there's all this stuff. So I really had to pivot and be like, it's not about that. And I still think there's value in making something you're proud of and
Yeah.
being really beautiful, but also it's so much more about the process than the product when it comes to art therapy. And I always tell folks, you can rip this up at the end of our session.
Yeah.
Please, like, you don't need to get this right, or you can keep it in a journal and it's just like your rough sketches, right? Like, you're not going to show this to anybody. And I think there's really a lot of healing and just being able to let go and know that it can be wadded up and thrown in the trash when you're done, and that's okay because it served its purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you think kind of what you we stated earlier too, because I tend to say that a lot, is do you think clients kind of understand you a little more because the fact that you have a disability? Like for me, I know like the clients you talk to that have a physical disability, because I know for me, I've gone to therapist after therapist, and when I talk about certain issues, like when I talk about the fact of my me being a little person, it's a struggle, like they can like be like, listen to me, give me advice, but if you really have never been in that situation, you really don't know. And you don't even have to be a little person, but just any kind of physical disability. If you don't have per se a physical disability, you just don't understand. Again, you can empathize with it, but you can't like totally get it. It's kind of like the fact of like, not to turn this around on me, but like also the fact of like why, because I'm going to school to be a dietitian. And I'm going to school to be a dietitian because one, I want to be able to help the unrepresented, like the disabled, but then also I want to be able to help little people or help people in general because I went through it. And I feel like I had a dietitian when I was in the hospital, and she like, again, you only know what you know. She didn't have an eating disorder. So like telling me to eat or telling me to do something, you can't tell me to do, like you can, but you just don't, you can't like give me that love unless you've had it. So do you think clients like want feel more comfortable with you since you have a physical disability?
I do think so. I do. And I've tried to be pretty clear when I like market myself as a therapist too, that that's like what I do. And I self-disclose, not telling my whole life story, but saying like I have a physical disability. I'm a little person. Like, I love working with this community. And it's amazing. Like, pretty much every email I get looking for a therapist is somebody who has some sort of physical disability or chronic illness. I'm so grateful because it does show that like there's such a need, and I know I needed that. Like, if I had that, I would have been yeah, fortunate and felt so seen. And it's kind of like you're making me think about when I was with my first therapist, who again I loved, and she changed my life. But I think, like, for example, like I would talk about how hard dating is and how scared I was to like go on the apps and things like that, and like, how do I present myself, like all these things. And I think she meant well, but she was like, well, everyone struggles with dating. It's just hard, And it's like, I think I've got a really complex situation on my hands here. Like, I think there's a lot more nuance to this, right? Like, yeah, no, it is hard. There's a lot of things that little people go through that are just like everyone else. Like, being a human being is hard, but there's these other layers that we deal with that are just really challenging. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to like do that. And
Yeah.
um, so yeah, I think it was just like things were normalized, or at least maybe minimized was maybe the better word.
Yes. Yeah.
With like good intentions, right? Like wanting me to feel less alone, but I think it made me feel more alone.
Yeah.
And yeah, so to your question, yeah, like I think having a physical disability, especially one that is right there, it's
Right
apparent.
there in your face.
Yeah, especially my in-person folks, like, or even virtually, I'm sure folks who haven't seen me in person can tell I have small hands. I have a shorter neck. Like, there's just different proportions to me. And so, yeah, I think it matters a lot. And I do my best to self-disclose when it's necessary, but also not like, again, like assume that just because we both are disabled that we have the same experiences or the same emotions around it, especially those who have a very different disability from me. For instance, those who are like neurodivergent, I identify more as neurotypical. So like I definitely don't understand that experience and how challenging that condition can be. So it's just, but there is like a similarity in terms of like, I know what it's like to be different. I know what it's like when systems are not built for you. I know how to, that you have to be such an advocate all the time and how exhausting it is. And so there are things that resonate even though they're different. And when they are different, I do try to voice that and name like, how can I help you find community,
Yeah.
and identify and work with people who or just at least be around people who do understand, because I've definitely found as I've gotten older, and gotten over myself and my own internalized ableism and my own internalized stigma against the little people community, just based on my own discomfort with that identity. I have found such power and healing in community, and I don't think I could live without it now.
I'm sure they often feel like, because I know it's kind of the same for me or any of us that have physical disabilities, it feels like that makes up their identity. Like, I'm Gwen, I am a little person, instead of I'm Gwen who has dwarfism. It's like I am that, because of the fact that with our constant surgeries, our constant like getting pictures, our constant being an advocate for ourselves, needing special accommodations, all that. So for clients who have physical disabilities or disabilities in general, how do you make them see that their physical disability is not who they are?
Hmm. It's definitely a balance, because I think in some ways people like don't want to associate with it. And then there are some who are like maybe over, not even over identify. I say that in a non-judgmental way, but like
Yeah.
feel like it defines them so much. And I think balance is so key, because it is a huge part of your life. But there's also so much more to you. And I think what I do a lot is I try to help folks, like we talk a lot about the world and the systems we live in, right? And I've learned a lot. It's like having a disability is such a human thing. It's just a variation of being a person. And I think helping folks understand like what would be known as like the social model of disability. Like yes, you have like a medical condition, right? That makes you different, that does impact your body. Let's say if we're just talking about dwarfism. But also, as you said earlier, like the world is not designed for you in mind. So what would it look like if the world were differently built, or the world didn't have these biases, or just didn't stigmatize those who are different? Like, kind of like what would it look like for you? And kind of just being like, is it your fault? Is it as an individual, your burden to bear, or is this a societal problem that you just happen to kind of be in this position of? Like, there's stigma of all sorts. There's stigma of racial stigma, right? And there's so many stigma against LGBTQ community. If any way that you don't fit into this very small box of normal, it's like you're going to experience oppression and trauma, and you're going to have a more tension in your life. So helping to paint that picture is always so key, and offering folks resources. But I think what really folks need to do is like go through their own grieving process around that, and actually like facing their emotions. So if people are maybe over identifying with their disability, like I want to meet them there. I want to say like, what is it that you're feeling about this? Are you angry? Are you sad? Like what's the emotion that you're carrying? And how do we access that emotion and like move through it? If you need to be angry and get it out, if you need to cry, if you need to make art about it or talk about it more, like how can you like release this pain that you're carrying emotionally, because it's feeling stuck a lot of times for people. So helping them do that and go through their own grief and get to a place of maybe a more radical acceptance around what's going on, but through that radical acceptance, maybe also seeing like, hey, like I can still have a great life actually, and I can infuse this part
Yeah.
of myself into my life and my story, into what I do, and make meaning out of it. And sometimes for people that meaning is being a part of a really awesome community of like-minded people and feeling really, really connected and supported. Sometimes it's making a career out of it, kind of like you and I, doing something with it to make it purposeful. But yeah, I think it's both like seeing the system and also doing their own individual grief work around it.
Yeah, because I think like you bringing up a good point of like having grief about it, because for so long I was so against, for example, dating little people, because again, my identity was trapped in me being a little person, and I don't know. I'm still kind of weird about dating average sized people, just because the whole fetish thing, like dating in general, I was just like too many people stare, too many looks. So if it like me being by myself, a little more fine. But two people, two little people, it's like this whole shock factor. And I don't want that. But then after I kind of like went through it and grieved, it was like, okay, so then are you gonna live your life for you or the world? Like, are you going to choose how you want? Are you gonna choose being alone? Or are you gonna choose like fuck what the world says? That doesn't matter. And I think once I started living like that, of like, okay, who cares, like you're not living for other people. It's kind of almost like when we get over that, but then we also go through and kind of work through it. It's like you stop, it's almost like it stops giving energy, but then you almost stop like caring. Like once I started dating little people, or like my boyfriend's a little person, I don't pay attention to it. But it's like you had to go through that, and you had to go through that process of like noticing little people are going to stay, but then you also had to realize like, okay, is this my life? Are you going to literally live your life for other people? And then once you stop putting all your energy in that, it's like now it's I mean, people stare, but like I don't even care. But then, I mean, I care to some degree. But then also, it's like you just kind of stop paying attention because not to keep repeating myself, but like you stop putting all your energy and all your focus into that one thing.
Absolutely. And I think like what we were saying earlier about denial, it's like I think before you go through that grief, you're in this place of like trying to just push all this away. Like I don't want to deal with this. I don't want this to be true. I don't want to have people stare at me. I also had that same experience and I do have to be married to an average height person, but I think now having gone through my own grief, like I wouldn't feel the same way. Like if
Yeah.
I would date somebody who's disabled and,
Yeah.
or little or whatever, but it's like I was so concerned of what other people thought. And for the same reasons, like it's so nuanced. Like you said, like you and I both know that when we're just us, it's not, we don't feel as like, we don't stand out as much as if we
Yeah.
were with another little person. It's just, it becomes more of a thing. And, but yeah, you do have to just kind of face those feelings. And I had to go through a lot of just like therapy and crying and journaling and like really being sad about it to
Yeah.
then get on to the other side and kind of seeing things totally with new eyes and realizing like okay, like I can't do this anymore. Like I gotta live my life. And back to that systemic piece too, I think learning more about like this is like society's problem. They're just so uncomfortable with difference of all kinds, and everybody's projecting so much
Yeah.
of their own fears of difference or wanting to conform. And it's yeah, it just you start to not own other people's stuff as much
Yeah.
because it's all their stuff. And it's so cliche, but it says so much more about them than it does us if they are.
Exactly. And it stops being about you and who you
Yeah.
are. Like now, if I see, like, for example, I was just at this LPA convention. I was walking and I was walking in the hotel and there was a lot of little people in the hotel. And like my boyfriend, he's not really much of a confrontational, and I'm not really either. But I've been getting more self-confidence, I guess. And he was just like, oh, that person's recording those little people. And I was like, oh, hell no. And I
Yeah.
turned around and I like said something to him. And when you confront them about it, they don't like that. It's because then they realize that it's about them. And I'm like, no, you did. And I was very loud because I wanted everyone else to see him and look at him. But it's like me being on the outside or me being that person, I could not imagine like recording someone or doing that. And it's like, I feel so bad to little Gwen, or even, no pun intended, but for little Gwen or even like anybody else, like that is not your fault. That does not make who you are.
No, it never was. And I think for so long we think it's like our job to manage other people's feelings about how
Yeah.
we look or what, and I always felt like I had to overcompensate and be like perfect in all these other ways
Yeah.
because I just thought my body and my disability or being a little person like defined me so much that I just felt this like let me define myself,
Yeah.
but also
Mhm.
is like also other people have to be open to seeing you for all of you, who you are.
Mhm.
And I've been so fortunate to have so many wonderful people in my life of average height and little and other disabilities like who don't care, and it does kind of sort out who the right people are for you. But it doesn't mean it's not hard, and also cliche, but grief is not linear. Like
Yeah.
we can go through it many times in our life. I know like I'll think I'm fine and then I'll have a really hard day and I'll have someone take a picture and I go through it again.
Yeah.
But I think it's about learning that it's okay to feel your feelings about it and that if you move through them, you'll be okay and maybe even better for it.
Yeah. And then when you have those clients that have a hard time building that identity. How do you build that trust with them that have been through a lot? Like how do you build the trust that like, okay, let's talk about it? And I'm sure a lot of it has to do with art. Like even
Mm.
if they don't talk, they can just do it. But how do you per se build that trust?
Yeah, really good question. I think rapport and trust and the therapeutic relationship is like 90% of the work is just making someone feel safe. And I think if people feel safe and accepted for everything they are and really, really feel that, like they can do a lot by just having that safe container to open up and do what they need to do and say what they need to say to be honest with themselves and feel like I'm not gonna be scared by what they say or over, react a certain way. Like so I mean, it sounds simple, but just like I try to be warm, I try to be validating, I try to be funny. I love humor. I'm not a serious. I can be a serious therapist, but like I like to be human. I'll show up and I don't dress super fancy for work. I wear regular, just kind of casual clothes. We talk about the shows we like and there's more of a human quality to it and I try my best to like not ever act like I know better than them because they're the experts of their lives and I'm not and I try to be humble and not I'm not there to give advice. I'm there to guide and ask maybe questions that help them think or if they ask for guidance I will, but I also always try to paint it and say like take this with a grain of salt. I'm still a person.
Yeah.
I'm not a robot. I've lived my own life and I have my own biases too and my own lived experiences that may make me say certain things that maybe another therapist wouldn't.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think practicing that humility is really important. And I do work with a lot of folks who have had like negative experiences with therapists or doctors or not being believed. And so really believing them is huge. So yeah, I try to just like be the opposite maybe of maybe what
Yeah.
they've had in the past. And I just want them to know I'm a person too. I think
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Do you notice like a common theme per se for, again, this, we're going to focus on this, but obviously you don't just do this, but per se with physical disabilities, like shame and who they are because of someone told them that, or just like you said, a doctor, or even medical trauma, or even issues like that. Like for example, when I was younger, and not to trauma dump on you, but when I was younger, like I was often told, like, don't eat this. You can't eat this because your siblings are taller and you're shorter. So that kind of reinforcement of I'm different than my siblings. And it kind of kept telling myself over in my head. And then my mom, I grew up with a mom who has an eating disorder. And so body image and then being reinforced that I was different kind of just reinforced that issue. Like, I'm different. I'm different. I can't be the same as my siblings. So, do you notice a common theme with physical disability patients that someone has told them something to kind of make them feel that they are wrong or that their body is different and they should be kind of ashamed of it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's everything you said. Yes, I've heard that before. I think, yeah, there's a lot of, with physical disability specifically, there's so much emphasis your whole life, or at least from the onset of your disability, if it came later in life, that like you are something to be fixed. And whether that's through straightening your legs, which is what many of us go through, and I'm not saying that that's like, I know that can be a very helpful thing long
Yeah.
term, but there's just always an emphasis on like sometimes like the next thing and the next
Yeah.
thing. It's for like
Mhm.
you're always a work in progress sort of
Yeah.
thing. And I know like my mom, she's average height and she struggled with body image and things. And I think, projected some of that onto me too. Like my mom's very thin and I've always been more like chunky and I, like all LPs, I have a butt, I have, like, and I
Yeah.
never knew like what I was supposed to look like. I didn't know what was like a healthy weight for me. And I think there was confusion too around like how much should I eat? Is it less than, an average height person? What is that? And there's just, you don't have a lot of examples. And of course, I limited myself from other little people because of my own internalized
Yeah.
shame about it. So I didn't like allow myself to see other adults. And I think that would have been very helpful for me. But yeah, I think like you're always in and out of appointments and it's always like what's wrong with you. And like I've been to OBGYN appointments and the focus was on my dwarfism and not my uterus, right? Like it's a very thing where you're like, I'm also a woman that has gynecological things just like everyone else, not to like get too into the weeds, but yeah, it can feel like it dominates everything when maybe it's not the issue. And so I think people just feel a lot of shame around that. And it's something that's constantly worked on, of like how do you kind of get out of your stuff, like a lot of like unworthiness. I think a lot of common themes as I see is like people pleasing problems with boundary setting, problems, and that these are my own problems too. Relationship issues, being more anxious in relationships because you feel like a burden. So there's just like all these like nuanced things that come with like having a long-term physical disability. Yeah.
Well, even too, like I know for me, it's like everything and something obviously I work on, but it's like everything that happens, they didn't like me because I'm a little person. Of
Yep.
course, like it's always blaming the physical disability instead of no, or like you said, people pleasing. So it's like, no, that person could have just had a hard day. Maybe that person doesn't like you, but also gonna you don't like other people. So it's completely fine. But it's always being like, no, no, it's gotta be the physical disability. Or like you said, like I mean, our bodies are different. That happens. We're not shaped like average people, and there's not a lot of information of what we should do. So then it's like, okay, reinforcing that I'm different. But it's like you said, going back to that's not who you are, that's not your identity, and just going back to that common ground of that.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's like asking them like when they'll say certain things out loud like that, like I might, push back and be like, who told you that? Who
Yeah.
told you? Is it because you're little or is it because you have a disability or did you just assume that?
Yeah.
Because it probably has nothing to do with that. But it's so easy to feel like, oh gosh, I have to be the perfect friend in all these other ways because I feel like I'm a burden because we can't my friends can't do everything they want to do because I'm disabled and we can't go to this certain bar because there's stairs
Yeah.
or whatever. It's like you feel like you're hindering people because of your needs sometimes, and I think there's a tendency to like not ask for what you need or just kind
Yeah.
of go along with what other people need because you feel like you're taking up space already. So it's like, but it's not your fault. Like you have to. You didn't ask for this. You're not being picky or rigid. It's just like genuinely what you need. But it's very hard to like also remember that you are worthy of all things.
And going back to your job as a
Mhm.
whole, what would you say is like the most rewarding part of your job?
I love my job. I am so lucky to do what I do. I feel so honored to have people share what they share with me. I feel like sometimes I have such a like I almost feel like I've got my finger on the pulse of what people are really thinking and going through to the point where I feel less alone.
Yeah.
Like you hear all these perspectives and you're like, oh God, like even me, I'll be like, I didn't know anyone else thought that. Yeah, me too. It's like really affirming because it's like
Yeah.
you get to hear people's like inner world and their darkest thoughts and like things they're maybe like, does anyone else think this way? And I'll be like, sometimes I'm like, I do, or sometimes I'm just like, yes, people do, and it's really me.
Yeah.
And but long story short, yeah, I think just like the honor of others trusting me is so rewarding. And I typically work with folks for not like forever, but you have longer term relationships. Like there's some clients I've worked with for like 4 years now. And I think those like long term relationships are so huge for me,
Yeah.
just like seeing all that's happened and almost like stopping and pausing with them and be like, do you remember where you were this time like 2 years ago? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Sometimes people get frustrated because they feel like progress and growth is so slow. But when you look back, it's like, no, so much has happened. Being a part of people's journeys, like seeing them through maybe all of grad school or seeing them through all of like a new relationship or being a part of their wedding planning process and just all those things, like just these like being kind of along the ride for these like major life milestones for people is such an honor. And sometimes I don't know what my role is even like if somebody's getting married, I'm like, do I send a gift? I wasn't invited to the wedding because you have such an up close personal relationship with them, but
Yeah.
like you don't know what their spouse looks like. You've never seen their face. So I don't know. It's just a really weird job. I have with my own therapist who I'm so grateful for. And we always are just like, this is the weirdest job. Like you're so close, but so
Yeah.
some people you've never met them in real life. It's just virtual. So I don't know, but yeah, there's so many rewarding things.
And what would you say is like the hardest part?
I think just witnessing people when they feel so trapped and stuck where they are. And I tend to always like if I'm witnessing somebody like going through grief, right, or going through something really hard, I'm able to see the forest from the trees a little bit more than they are. And I'm able to, not that I want people to be like distressed or emotional, but like sometimes I can watch that and be like, where you're at is where you're supposed to be. And I know it doesn't feel like it's ever going to end. And I know that like it's dark right now, but like you are feeling what you're feeling and you're supposed to be. And like I believe in you. I think believing in people when they don't believe in themselves, maybe, or believe that it's going to be better, and just like watching them like really search for a solution when there is none. But I've gotten better at sitting in discomfort with people, but it can be very hard to feel like also like there's nothing I can do a lot of the time,
Yeah.
especially for things like disability, right? Like it's always going to be that way. I work with some people who have more, conditions that keep them isolated, like in bed a lot. Like they're in bed all the time and they can't work. And I think, yeah, just like knowing that I want to do so much more and that they deserve so much better. They deserve more support than what
Yeah.
I could give them. So I think that can be really hard.
My last question is, how do you think community is for healing when someone's going through something?
I think community is key. Not that therapy isn't important, but I think community may be more important than therapy. Yeah, it's everything. I think with disability specifically, you could feel so, so, so alone. And we are so, unlike other, not saying it's always like this, but like some minority groups are more geographically connected,
Mhm.
right? Or there's more people that live amongst you, but I think with disability, it's like you're spread out so much, and like you said, you just got back from nationals, like you have to like make a trip to like physically gather
Yeah.
in a place to actually be around people who like look like you and understand your experiences. And it's wonderful, but it's like when you go, then you go back to your day-to-day life and
Definitely.
you're by yourself again. And so finding ways to build community is so huge. And luckily, the internet can have its drawbacks for sure, but like online spaces and being on Zoom, right? Like you can connect a lot more easily now. And yeah, so I think it's so huge. And, like I said earlier, sometimes like actually bringing yourself to that community can be a psychological barrier, right? Of like, what does it mean if I actually embrace this identity? If
Yeah.
I belong to this community, that means I have to accept that I'm little or I'm disabled or however that whatever terminology feels right. And I work with a lot of people who have like, for instance, I have a client with like a new diagnosis of MS. And for her, she's like, I want to seek community, but I also like don't want to yet. Like I'm scared because that makes it real.
That makes the realization of it, it's
Yeah.
real.
And you might meet people who are in different places with it than you are, or who have a different experience. And that might be really hard. And maybe you don't want to face that yet. And that's okay. It's a process. Again, grief, right? It's a process. But I think when people feel ready for a community, it is the best thing.
Well, thank you so much, Bri, for being on my podcast today and just sharing insight of a therapist's mind, but also just talking about the things that aren't talked about. I think that's so important, especially being someone who gets it, who understands, who've lived that road, who's seen it all. If you like this episode, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you enjoyed this episode, share with a friend who maybe needs a therapist as well, probably. So we'll see you guys next time and bye.